Terraform, Helm, and Kubernetes is a powerful trio. In this demo video, we're going to see how we're going to use env0 to have a uniform workflow where we're going to deploy an EKS cluster using Terraform through env0, and then we're going to use env0's Helm templates to deploy a Prometheus and a Grafana application so we can have a monitoring stack on this new cluster. So let's get started. All right, so I'm here inside of env0's dashboard, and I already have a project. And this project, as you can see here, is called env0 Kubernetes Prometheus Grafana. So you can easily create it with this button here. So I have it ready for us. And inside here, I have no environments. I don't have anything running just yet. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and create an environment. But to do that, we need templates. I already built three templates: a Terraform build EKS cluster template, an env0 Helm Grafana template, env0 Helm Prometheus template. This one is a Terraform template, and these two are Helm templates. So if we go inside here, you can see how you can create this template. Of course, we select Terraform as our template type, give it a name, a description, Terraform version, and so on. Then we tie it into our version control system, which in this case is GitHub, and this is my repo. And I have my Terraform configuration that lives here in this Terraform folder. The variables section, I don't really have any variables, but if you had variables, you can add them here. And then finally, I'm applying this template to my project specifically. Of course, I can apply it to multiple projects as well. So that's the template that we're going to start working with. So let's go ahead into our project environment, create a new environment, select our template, which is this template, and let's go ahead and say run now. And everything is fine, just leaving it as is. And let's just go ahead and click run. What this is going to do is it's going to give us our logs here. So it's it's cloning the repo, doing a bunch of things. And here's our Terraform init, where it's initializing Terraform inside the env0 worker. While this carries on, what I wanted to show you is that you need to add credentials under settings and credentials here. So what you need to do is have your AWS credentials right here. So your AWS access keys, so the access key ID and secret access key, that needs to be inserted here so that you can have env0 connect to AWS through Terraform. We're going to later see how we have our env0 EKS cluster monitoring as a Kubernetes credential as well. So far, deploy is in progress, and I can see that the Terraform plan has completed, and you can see how many resources we're expected to generate. So I have 56 resources that we're going to create. So you can see here the EKS add-ons, PCs, subnets, a bunch of things to get our cluster ready to go. And at the end, we're going to see a few outputs here. So I'm going to approve this, and you can see also the cost estimation, by the way. This uses infra cost within env0, so $148 per month. Okay, so there's a breakdown for the cost as well. So I'll go ahead and approve that. And as you can see here, it's approved. Deployment will resume shortly. Now, this is going to take quite some time. I think anywhere from 10 to 20 minutes to get our cluster ready. This has to do with AWS building our, the networking behind the cluster and also the cluster. So while that runs, let me show you a couple of things in terms of, first of all, the templates that we're going to use with our Helm. So we've got two templates that I mentioned, Grafana and Prometheus. Let's take a look at Prometheus first. And in this case, using the template type of Helm inside of env0, you just give it a name and a description, and then moving on, you go to VCS. And in this case, we're not tying this into a GitHub repo or GitLab. We're tying it to a Helm repo directly. So in this case, I have my Helm repository here for Prometheus with the version I'm interested in and the Helm chart. To be able to populate these fields, you need to find where you want to get the Helm chart for Prometheus from. So I've already looked this up under Artifact Hub. And if you go under Artifact Hub and click install, it will give you here the actual chart here. So you can copy that. And then the Prometheus chart is what we want. So this is the URL and this is the chart. And the version that we're running is 25.11.0. So with that, we can easily populate. Let's make this a bit bigger. We can easily populate all the fields that we need here. Okay. Variables, we can always add variables in case you want to add some variables into the values file inside of the Helm chart. So if I make this a bit bigger as well, you can see the default values. So you can set any of these values if you wish. And you can also look at the value schema. So if you find any of these values that you want to incorporate into the Helm deployment, you can do so. And then all you need to do is just populate the variables in here. And then finally, as we did before, we're going to associate the template with the project that we're working on, as you see here. So that's the Prometheus template, very similar. We have our Grafana template. We have a Helm template type, give it a name, a description, tie it to the Helm repository for Grafana, the version, and the Helm chart name, which I have as well here under Artifact Hub as well. And you go into install and you can see exactly what you need to populate inside of env0. That done, variables, we don't need to do anything. And then projects, we're associating it with the same project that we're working on. All right. Now, one more thing we need to do, and that is to look at the credentials for us to access the cluster so that we can deploy the Helm charts inside the cluster, the EKS cluster that gets created. So I have a set of credentials here. You can see I call it nzero EKS cluster monitoring. And right here, you can see the name of the credential that we just mentioned here. The type is Kubernetes, AWS EKS configuration. There is Azure, there's GCP, and there's just a kubeconfig file that you can add if it's maybe an on-prem Kubernetes cluster. It's not one of the managed cloud clusters that you see here. Sorry, one thing here is you need to put the cluster name and you need to give it the region, which I already did. And that is actually found inside of the Terraform file, which we'll see in just a bit. So once you configure that, you need to go into your project settings. And under project settings, go to credentials and check the Kubernetes credentials and select the one we just created. Now, I had the AWS credentials already selected here. So that's one thing I forgot to mention earlier. Just make sure that you have this selected within the project or else you'll run into an issue. So there's two places to set your AWS credentials. Once in the settings, the main settings of your organization, and then you need to bring that into your project under project settings. I also have AWS cost settings or credentials as well, and that's what we saw. InfraCost was able to give us that estimate that we just saw. An ongoing, it can monitor your costs ongoing. Okay, so that's great. And let's go back to our project environment, and we can still see that the deployment is in progress. And you can see the Terraform apply. And as I mentioned, this will take quite some time. So we'll just wait for that. In the meantime, let's take a look at our repo here. So here's our repository. As you see, nothing really fancy other than a folder called Terraform. And inside of here, I have a few things. I've got a main file, and let's make this a bit bigger. And let's close this. So the main file basically calls on a module EKS and provides a few variables. US East 1 is the region, my cluster version, my cluster name, and this is the name that I supplied into the credentials of Kubernetes inside of env0 so that it can connect to that cluster. Instant types is T2 small, my VPC CIDR block, and then cluster minimum size, maximum size, and desired size. So we're going to end up with 2 nodes that we'll see later. Outputs file is all the outputs that we saw before. Now, inside the modules here, the EKS module is really where all the magic happens. So you can see the provider is AWS. And a lot of configuration here. We're calling on the module VPC. So we're building a VPC with a few subnets, private and public. And then the module EKS, we're calling on that module as well. Both of these are public modules in the public module registry, giving them versions and supplying them with some of the variables that we want. And that's it. Adding some add-ons here to our cluster. You can see the EKS add-on, the RSA, EBS, CSI. And that sums it up. We have some variables and the version that we're using for the different providers that we're running with. And that's it in terms of using Terraform to stand up our AWS cluster. Moving back here, and I still see that this is still deploying in progress. So I'm going to pause the video and we'll come back once all is set up. Looks like we successfully created our EKS cluster. You can see here our outputs. So everything seems to have completed. Now our next step is to deploy our Helm charts. So let's go ahead and go to project environments once again, create a new environment template, and we're going to select the Helm Prometheus template. So let's leave everything as is. Let's just give it a name, Prometheus here. That's the name of the Helm environment. Namespace, we'll leave it in the default namespace and click run. That should go ahead and get started for us. And similar to the workflow, oh, we saw something here, break. Now let's see what happened. Kubernetes cluster unreachable. Let's see if we actually enabled, I've seen this before. I think we might need to double check in our project environment. Project settings, credentials. We need to make sure that this is enabled. For some reason it got disabled. So make sure that, again, the deployment credentials for Kubernetes is enabled. Do that after you've deployed the EKS cluster just to make sure. So back to our project environments, retry deploy, and we'll go ahead and retry the deploy here. And as I was saying before, it follows the same similar workflow that you're used to with Terraform. So there's an initialize phase, right? We're initializing here. As you can see, we're grabbing the kube config from the EKS cluster for region US East. We're adding the Helm repo here. And then we're running a Helm diff, which is similar to Terraform plan. So we're looking at what's going to be added, what's going to be removed. And once all is good, we can approve it. So a very similar workflow, which is what really something I really like about env0 is that it doesn't matter which template you're using, CloudFormation or using Terraform, using Kubernetes directly or Helm. It doesn't matter. You're going to end up with a similar workflow. Everything is tied into RBAC. So you have teams, you have users within these teams that have specific access. So it gives you the same workflow depending on whether you're deploying in Kubernetes, deploying straight Terraform. So I really like that. Okay, that's going to go ahead and create or run the Helm upgrade for us and install with version 25.11. So we'll let this continue to run. In the meantime, let's create another project or another environment using the Grafana template this time. And we'll give this one the name Grafana for the release name. Go ahead and run that. That will do the same thing we saw before. Initializing here, running a Helm diff. And then once it's waiting for approval here, we'll go ahead and approve. And that should give us or get the Helm upgrade step working. Okay, let's go back to project environments, see what's active. I see Prometheus is active. Let's just give it a couple of minutes for Grafana. And actually, in the meantime, let's go ahead and cheat and look at one of these environments, the Helm environments. So let's look at this one, which is actually just successfully finished. So let's go back to our deployments. And in the deployments, I want to look at the initialize phase because I want to grab this. And what this is going to do is going to give me the context to access the cluster. So now I can go into my Visual Studio Code And let's open a terminal. Let's clear out of here. And let's run this command. I'm already connected through the AWS CLI to my AWS environment. So now I see my context has changed to the new env0 EKS cluster monitoring. And I can run kubectl get nodes. I see I have 2 nodes, as I mentioned before, with version 127.9. And I can go ahead and run kubectl get namespaces. And I see my default namespace. I'm already in the default namespace. Let's just double check. Kubernetes takes me to the default. Let's clear and let's run kubectl get all. And what this is going to do, it's going to give me all the pods that are running. I have one Grafana pod and a bunch of Prometheus pods that are running. And I've got my services here. So we're going to connect to the Grafana service. But first, let's go ahead and get the secret from Grafana. So we can clear and run Helm ls. So we're going to see that we've got, make this smaller. We've got Grafana and Prometheus. These are the 2 Helm releases that we have, the charts and the version of these charts as well. So if we run Helm status Grafana, this is how we're going to get the password that gets automatically dropped into this secret called Grafana. Let's clear that and run this command. It should give us the secret so we can log in with admin and this secret. So let's get the services once more. And from here, we're going to run a port forward to our service Grafana, and let's expose this on port 3000. And this is exposed internally on port 80. So that looks good so far. Open in browser. And here we go. We have our login screen for Grafana. That looks pretty good. Admin. And then the password that I just copied from there. And we have Grafana running. So what we can do is we can connect Grafana to Prometheus. Let's use a data source, a Prometheus data source. Add a data source Prometheus. And from here, all we need to do is just specify the URL, the Prometheus server URL, which you get from right here, Prometheus server. This is the service that's exposed internally for Prometheus, so we can just use that and then run a quick test, save and test. That has succeeded. So that looks really good. Let's go ahead and explore really quickly. Here's our data source Prometheus. Let's explore something. Open up Metric Explorer. Let's look for memory, a container or something, or memory. I don't know. Let's pick up something here that might be of interest. Let's see node memory active file bytes. Let's see what that looks like. Run the query. And already we see our graph is running. Let's look at the last 5 minutes, and you can see we've successfully deployed our application using Helm through env0. So, moral of the story, running Terraform to set up your EKS cluster, then running Helm to set up your application, deploy your application, all under the same umbrella of env0, same workflow, makes things much easier for organization. Hopefully you've got a quick view into how or what the best practices is to deploy this application in Kubernetes. Now, you might be tempted to think, well, Sam, why don't we just deploy everything with Terraform? While that's true, and you can basically use the Helm provider for Terraform to deploy your application. However, it's not a practice that I see done often. There are some issues with that I'll cover in this blog post that you can dig deeper. For the most part, it becomes a little bit tricky when it comes to Helm upgrades. So far, if you're deploying this for the first time, then yeah, it doesn't matter. But as you maintain the life cycle of your application, it's better to use Helm for that. Kubernetes has evolved over the years, and there are many ways to deploy applications. Helm is just one of them, which is considered a package manager for Kubernetes. You can always use plain old kubectl commands. You can use customize. You can use argo cd. So there is no point in going and using or hacking Terraform to deploy your Kubernetes applications. Might as well use what's been tested for a long time. Or Terraform itself needs to keep up with Kubernetes, and you have to keep updating the provider, which sometimes isn't fast enough. I know that there is a new provider called, I believe, Kubernetes Alpha that holds some promise, but so far it's been recommended to use only in testing environments and not in production. I hope this has been helpful, and I'll see you in another video.